They were never supposed to be here. For 2 decades, this nation was invisible, forgotten every time the World Cup came around, ignored while Europe's giants ruled the stage. But now something unbelievable is happening. A country that hadn't been relevant since the 90s is suddenly destroying everyone in its path. They're not scraping wins, they're crushing teams, humiliating nations that once laughed at them. And as the qualifiers unfold, all of Europe is starting to realize this isn't luck, this is a takeover. Because somehow, this small, overlooked nation is on the verge of silencing the entire continent. For years, Norway was a ghost in world football. No World Cup appearances since 1998, no big tournament runs, no iconic moments, just another forgotten team, trapped in the shadows of Europe's football empires. While nations like France, England, and Germany built dynasties, Norway quietly disappeared, producing decent players, sure, but never enough to matter. They were the kind of team you expected to see in 4th place in every qualifying group, solid, disciplined, and irrelevant. But in the last few years, something changed. A new generation began to rise, fearless, athletic, and hungry to prove that Norwegian football wasn't dead. The country invested in youth academies, technology, and analytics, building players who could compete physically and mentally with Europe's best. This wasn't the old, rigid Norway. This was a team built for modern football. And then came the spark, the moment everything shifted. As these young players grew together, the results started to turn. Draws turned into wins. Wins turned into dominance. Suddenly, Norway wasn't the team everyone overlooked. They were the team nobody wanted to face. Their football became faster, colder, ruthless, the kind that didn't just surprise you, it embarrassed you. And Europe began to notice, because this time Norway wasn't here to take part. They were here to take over. Every revolution starts with humiliation. And for Norway, that moment came when they once again failed to qualify for the 2022 World Cup. It wasn't just another disappointment, it was the final straw. The country had world-class talent emerging, but no results to show for it. People began to whisper that Norway was wasting its golden generation, that they had the players but not the belief, so the federation made a bold move. They stopped trying to copy other nations' styles, the tiki-taka of Spain, the heavy metal football of Germany, and instead built something uniquely Norwegian, a system designed for speed, intensity, and power. The goal wasn't to play beautifully, it was to win ruthlessly. They started focusing on development programs, pushing mental strength, tactical awareness, and physical dominance from the youth level up. The idea was simple. Norway may not have the history, but we'll make up for it with hunger. And when this new team stepped onto the pitch, you could feel it. They weren't timid or respectful anymore, they were fearless. They pressed high, attacked relentlessly, and celebrated like a nation that had been ignored for too long. Then came the first statement win, a crushing victory that made Europe stop scrolling and start watching. From that moment, Norway wasn't the underdog with potential. They were the storm nobody saw coming. And as the goals piled up, one thing became clear. This wasn't a fluke, it was a transformation. When the 2025 World Cup Qualifiers began, nobody expected Norway to lead the headlines. They were just another name in the fixture list, until the goals started coming. And they didn't just win, they destroyed. It began with a shocking 11-1 victory that sent social media into chaos. Commentators couldn't believe it. Fans thought it was a glitch on the scoreboard, but it wasn't. It was a message. Norway wasn't just here to qualify. They were here to humiliate anyone who doubted them. Match after match, they tore through defenses like they'd been doing it for years. 6 wins out of 6, more than 25 goals scored, only a handful conceded. Every game felt like a warning to the rest of Europe. Something terrifying is happening up north. Their football was ice cold and surgical. Fast transitions, lethal counterattacks, teamwork that looked rehearsed to perfection. They didn't play with arrogance, they played with purpose. Even the top nations began to feel the pressure, realizing that the underdog they once ignored was now leading the group comfortably. And the most striking part? Norway wasn't relying on one player, they were a machine. Every goal came from teamwork, precision, and belief. What used to be a country defined by failure was now rewriting the entire qualifying story. In every stadium, the same question echoed. How is this even happening? And Europe was about to find out. This storm wasn't stopping anytime soon. At first, everyone thought Norway's wins were just lucky runs, easy opponents, weak groups, beginners' momentum. But then, the giants started to fall. It began with a tense match against a former world champion, a team built on decades of prestige and ego, the kind of nation that had laughed at Norway for years, calling them a cold-weather team with no history. 90 minutes later, they weren't laughing anymore. Norway ran them off the pitch, fast, fearless, relentless. 3 goals, total domination, and not a hint of mercy. That victory wasn't just 3 points. It was a statement. It told the entire continent, this is not a fluke, this is the new order. After that, everything changed. Stadiums that used to be quiet during Norwegian matches were now sold out. Broadcasters started moving their games to prime time. Even rival managers admitted it. Norway plays like they have nothing to lose, and that's what makes them dangerous. Every win shook European football a little more. Traditional powers started to panic. Italy was slipping in the table. Germany's defense couldn't handle the intensity. And one by one, the giants that once ruled qualifying started looking mortal. What made it worse for them was the attitude. Norway didn't celebrate like underdogs. They celebrated like a team that expected to win, calm, focused, almost cold. They didn't care about names or reputations. To them, every match was another chance to prove what the world refused to believe, that the forgotten nation had become the most feared team in Europe. And while the rest of the continent tried to understand what was happening, Norway just kept winning, quietly, efficiently, and ruthlessly. Because when you've been ignored for so long, silence becomes your loudest weapon. As the wins kept coming, something began to shift far beyond the pitch. For the first time in decades, Norway, a country better known for skiing than football, started to believe. Bars that never showed qualifiers were suddenly packed. Kids wore red jerseys in the streets, chanting before matches like it was a national holiday. Even the older generation, the ones who still remembered the heartbreaks of the 90s, started to say it out loud. This might actually be our time. The energy spread like wildfire. In Oslo, murals began appearing, not of pop stars or politicians, but of footballers. Newspapers that once criticized the team for being too soft now printed headlines like "The North has risen." The national anthem hit different before kickoff, louder, prouder, and filled with something Norway hadn't felt in 25 years, hope. But what made this rise special wasn't just the winning, it was the identity. Norway wasn't copying anyone. Their football was unapologetically theirs, direct, disciplined, cold, efficient. They didn't play to entertain Europe, they played to represent themselves, and that authenticity resonated. Every goal felt like a collective victory. Every win, a small piece of redemption for years of being forgotten. You could see it in the players' faces. They weren't just winning matches. They were carrying a nation that had been asleep for too long. The story had outgrown football. It had become something bigger, a reminder that sometimes the smallest countries create the loudest echoes. It didn't take long for Europe to realize this wasn't a Cinderella story. It was an awakening. The continent that had mocked Norway for years suddenly couldn't stop talking about them. The team everyone used to skip on the fixture list had turned into the team to fear. Analysts who once called them too small, too inexperienced, now spent entire shows trying to decode how they were doing it. Clips of their pressing, their counterattacks, and their ruthless efficiency flooded social media. Fans from other countries started tuning in just to watch this chaos unfold, because every match felt like a new chapter in a story that shouldn't even exist. European giants were rattled. Italy couldn't keep up with their intensity. Germany's defensive line, built on discipline and tradition, looked helpless against Norway's speed. Even nations with world-class stars were being outplayed by a group of players who weren't supposed to be here. And it wasn't just the results, it was the manner of their victories. Norway didn't scrape through games, they dominated them. Their football was minimalistic but merciless. Every pass had purpose, every attack had venom. No flashy tricks, no overconfidence, just cold, calculated destruction. Across Europe, newspapers called it the Scandinavian Storm. Pundits said it was the rebirth of the North. And as the qualifiers went on, even rival fans started admitting it. This team was different. They didn't have the ego of a superpower or the pressure of history weighing on them. They played free, fearless, and united under one mission to prove that belief can build an empire. Meanwhile, the giants panicked. Their coaches were fired, their players criticized, their systems questioned. How could a country with a fraction of their population and resources suddenly take over? Nobody had the answer. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't about money or history or fame. This was about hunger. A generation of players who grew up being told they'd never matter, now making sure the world could never forget them. And as the qualifiers neared their end, the unthinkable became reality. Norway stood at the top of their group, undefeated, untouchable, unbothered. Europe, the proud, powerful continent of football, was watching in silence, because the forgotten nation had become its loudest echo. No one saw this coming. Not the analysts, not the fans, not even the nations that used to crush them without breaking a sweat. For 20 years, Norway was invisible, a footnote in football history. But in 2025, they didn't just return, they changed the story completely. This isn't just a tale about qualification, it's about belief, the kind that survives being ignored, mocked, and written off. A nation that had no golden era, no recent heroes, and no history of dominance suddenly became the symbol of what happens when pride turns into purpose.
Every goal they scored wasn't just a number on the scoreboard. It was a reminder to Europe of everything they'd overlooked. Every victory was a message. You can't buy hunger, you can't fake unity, and you can't silence a country that refuses to stay quiet. For years, Norway tried to fit into football's hierarchy. Now they've torn it down completely. And as the rest of the continent scrambles to adjust, one thing is crystal clear. This is no longer the Norway the world forgot. This is the Norway the world will remember. Because sometimes the loudest noise in football comes from the place everyone stopped listening to.